This Sunday is the Sunday we call Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi in English is the feast of the body and blood of Christ. I want to take you through the historical origin of this feast. It was some year 1263. A priest was moving from Prague to Rome on a pilgrimage, and he had some doubts about his priesthood. So he stood at some point and he celebrated Mass. At that Mass, something unusual happened. The bread that he raised during consecration became flesh, and the cup that he raised up became like dots of blood. And from that, the copro, or that is some cloth that is put under the chalice and the ciboria, where that blood poured, was preserved even up to today. When that miracle happened, the church, as usual, did some investigation, and Pope Urban IV, in the 13th century, declared a feast to celebrate the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and that feast is what was called the body and blood of Christ. So this feast has been celebrated in the church from the 13th century, and it is a day for us as Catholics to remember and to commemorate the real presence of Christ in the Eucharistic celebration. My dear friends, today we've had our readings. The first reading from the book of Exodus is about the food that the Israelites took in the wilderness, which was called manhu in Hebrew, and in English it was translated to manna. This was free food that was given in the desert. And as you know, when God met Moses and gave him the Decalogue, he instructed Moses to prepare a tabernacle, and in that tabernacle he put the piece, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, and some pieces and the remains of manna. And it's in this tabernacle where God was always seen as present in the people of Israel as they journeyed on their way to the promised land. So this manhu, this manna, and the tablet of the Decalogue was a sign of God's encounter with humanity. Today in the Gospel we've heard chapter 6 of John's Gospel, and it started with the multiplication of the loaves. You know what that means? It was miraculous for a young man with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread feeding the 5,000. It was an impossible thing. Philip said that there's no way we can feed these people. But Andrew said, there's a young lad here. And Jesus multiplied those fish and those pieces of bread into food that 5,000 people took, and there were left over 12 baskets. My dear friend, all this is very symbolic, and it is good to know that the book of John is a book, what we call it a book of signs. And signs, they don't point to themselves, signs point to another reality. So the multiplication of the loaves is a pointer to what Christ is about to do and say, because the following day he goes to Capernaum in a synagogue, and he says that he is the real bread. And people are complaining and said, he is the real bread that people will eat and will never die. Those who ate manna in the desert died, but he said he is the real bread that people will eat and they will never die. The people could not comprehend that, because even in the Jewish culture, it was abhorrent for anyone to think about eating human flesh or drinking human blood. So they start murmuring, who is this? And he goes ahead and said, the food that I shall give is my body and my blood for the salvation of the world. And they say, is this not the son of Joseph and Mary? How can he say that we eat his bread, his body, and drink his blood? It was a concept that could not be understood by the Jews at that time. And that's why after that, Jesus had to hide himself, because they could not understand what he was talking about. My dear friend, Eucharist is the same. The body and blood of Christ cannot be understood using scientific or intellectual mind. We must first believe, then we must surrender in faith to God. And it is now in that God will come and make us understand the real presence of body and blood of Christ. It is good to know that this feast that we celebrate today is a feast where we as Christians, we are reminded about what Jesus did on the Last Supper, taking his body, the bread, and blessing it, and taking a cup and blessing it, was a sign of communion with the disciples who were seated there, because they had a meal together. So, my dear friend, this feast, Corpus Christi, it is not just a feast to celebrate another Sunday, but it is a feast to celebrate the presence of God. Christ is truly present in the Eucharistic celebration. It is not symbolic, it is him present. And the many miracles that have happened in the history that define and show that Christ is really present in the Eucharistic celebration. My dear friend, every time a priest raises the bread and raises the cup, there are many things that happen, but some of the things we may not see with our naked eyes. There is what we call transubstantiation, that the substances of the body and the blood remain, but there is a substantial change. The accidentals remain. We see the whiteness and the redness of the wine, but there is some change substantially, that the body, the bread becomes body, and the wine becomes the blood of Christ. My dear friends, today as we celebrate this great feast, it is a feast when we need to even ask about our faith in the Blessed Sacrament. How many times don't we realize the presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament? Many times we go for Mass and it's just like a routine, and we just attend a Mass and we don't realize that Christ is truly present. How many times do we as Christians pray to God in our private homes while the church is just a few meters or kilometers away, and there's a tabernacle, and you don't realize that there is presence of Christ? Don't wait to see Christ in the second coming. Christ left us a memorial, and he said, do this in memory of me. And every time a priest breaks that bread, there is real presence in the body and the blood of Christ. My dear friends, today as we celebrate this feast, many people will take some procession in towns and around churches. As the priests move with the monstrance around, it is a time to encounter Christ, and any encounter with Christ is a healing encounter. May you kneel and adore Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. May you kneel and ask for special graces, for graces of healing, for some special graces, because that is real Christ who is passing by. We need to be devout, and we need to know that it is real Christ. St. Thomas of Aquin, who was a great scholar, he wrote many books, and he is known for his books on Summa Theologica, the summary of theology. And at one time we celebrated Mass in a church in St. Nicholas. And after that he said he's not going to write anymore. And he said, what I've written is just a straw. And when one of his brothers in the priest's house asked him, why are you not writing anymore? He said, after celebrating that Mass, I have encountered Christ himself, and I've realized even what I've written is a straw. He says the marvel of the presence of Christ cannot be written in a book, cannot be imagined, you can only adore. And that's why St. Thomas sang and composed many songs on the Eucharistic adoration. Sacrum Sanctum, about the body, the body and the blood of Christ, that this is the real body. He said that our disposition as human persons to the presence of Christ should be the disposition of adoration. Let us adore Christ today. Let us know that it is Christ present in every celebration of Mass. And since there is no Mass, there is no Eucharist without a priest, this is also a day when we celebrate that gift that God gave us, the gift of priesthood. It is a great gift, not to the person who has been given it, but it is a gift that you cannot even fully comprehend. If you cannot comprehend fully the mystery of the Eucharist, you cannot also comprehend fully the mystery of priesthood. It remains a mystery to all of us. And that's why there is no priesthood without Eucharist, and there is no Eucharist without priest, because there is no way you can have a Eucharist without priest. My dear friends, today as we honor this great feast of the Corpus Christi, let us honor Eucharist and be conscious of Christ present. Let us also honor the priests who make present Christ at every altar on the world, because it is through them that Christ becomes present. And that's why priests have so many enemies, because many people don't want the word of God. It is actually, I would say, it is sometimes like the satanic powers fighting the church, because if you want to fight the church, fight Eucharist, and if you want to fight Eucharist, fight priesthood. Today, let us celebrate the presence of Christ in the Eucharist and his ministerial priesthood, and let us be joyous that we are gifted with that great gift. My dear friends, celebrate today and pray for a special grace from God. Thank you.